Like, there are no movie stars anymore. Like, Anthony Mackie isn't a movie star. The Falcon is a movie star. And that's what's weird. It used to be with Tom Cruise and Will Smith and Stallone and Schwarzenegger. When you went to the movies, you went to go see the Stallone movie. You went to go see the Schwarzenegger movie. Now you go see X-Men. So the evolution of the superhero has meant the death of the movie star.
In order to understand how the concept of movie stars has evolved over time, we need to go back to the 1930s. In the 1930s, sync sound is fully integrated into the film industry. Hollywood is fully established and at the height of the golden age. Many film scholars argue that the 30s and 40s are the greatest 2 decades for film. They're wrong. The business model for production companies at this time was much different than it is today. Hollywood was much more monopolized, with 5 major studios dominating every aspect of filmmaking. The 5 studios were MGM, Paramount, Fox, Warner Brothers, and RKO. All 5 of these companies were what is called vertically integrated, which is a business term referring to how the companies control every aspect of production. So in the context of a vertically integrated production company, the companies own the means to development, pre-production, production, post-production, exhibition, and distribution. The biggest issue with this model, besides general monopoly issues, is the ownership of exhibition and distribution. This created exploitative business strategies such as block booking and blind bidding. How does this relate to movie stars?
We get there when we get there!
Because the production companies were vertically integrated, they didn't work simply movie by movie. Their contracts were designed on a yearly basis. Actors and actresses would sign contracts with specific production companies for a set amount of years. When signed onto this type of contract, the actor or actress was required to be in any productions that the production company required of them during their contract time. So technically, an actor could be contractually obligated to be in 10 different films in a single year, or only 1 film that year, and get paid the same amount. This obviously led to the production companies taking massive advantage over their actors. With this production model, the producers had the most amount of control over the production, and the director was not nearly as important of a role as it is today. Directors now are one of the most hands-on roles during pre-production, but during this time, the producers handled everything and the directors were handed the script a day or so before. How does this relate to movie stars?
We get there when we get there!
The movie stars of this era did bring in an audience to the theaters, and the production companies took advantage of this by utilizing the contracts with a flat pay rate. Then, during the late 40s and starting in the 50s, a series of events changed the way the production companies work. Firstly, and probably most impactful, is the antitrust and anti-monopoly bills that were passed. Because the 5 main production companies dominated the entertainment industry and were vertically integrated, the government stepped in to break up those monopolies. The way they did this was to stop the companies from being vertically integrated by cutting off their ability to control exhibition and distribution. Production companies could no longer own the theaters they played their films in and would instead create deals with separate companies in order to play their films there. This caused a massive shift in the way these production companies would work. Firstly, they changed the business model to a package deal, meaning instead of an actor signing a contract to be in whatever movie for X amount of years, they sign on to a specific movie and are done with the contract when the movie is done. This caused actors to be given more rights to their work, time, and property, and mitigated production company exploitation. Along with actors signing packages instead of yearly contracts, the entertainment business mogul Lew Wasserman completely changed the game for actors when he was the financial agent for Jimmy Stewart, one of the largest and most popular Hollywood stars of all time, for his new movie Winchester 73. Wasserman essentially found a tax loophole when he realized he could create a business for one specific actor, because businesses get taxed less than individuals. So when signing the contract, Universal was saying that they would pay Jimmy Stewart the business rather than Jimmy Stewart the person. Lew Wasserman also created the concept of points in film, which is a similar concept to commission. Instead of getting paid a flat rate, the actor would get a small flat rate at the beginning of filming and then get a percentage of the film's profits at the end. After Winchester 73's release, Jimmy Stewart grossed more than 3 times the amount of profit he would have made if he went with the flat rate. This shifted the way actors would get paid and also led to actors having more control and more power on set. Another concept that shifted the business model of these production companies was the advent of television. Actors such as Lucille Ball transitioned over to TV and is more universally known for her work on I Love Lucy and Star Trek rather than her film work in the 40s like Dance Girl Dance. Television was scary for Hollywood producers at the time, and they went out of their way to try to compete with it. They used gimmicks such as widescreen and 3D to try and combat the convenience of television with the grandiose spectacle of cinema. Now, what does this have to do with the death of movie stars?
Get there when we get there!
Anyways, with the advent of TV, ticket sales were dropping steadily throughout the 50s, and Hollywood needed to change course. The business model was completely changed, actors had more power and were making more money, and less people were going to the movies. In the late 1940s, auteur theory began being written overseas, bringing more attention to the role and impact of the director. With this new theory rising in popularity, directors also started to gain more traction in the industry. With all of these issues, Hollywood started to change course by marketing to specific groups rather than making films for as wide an audience as possible. This niche marketing tactic led to the uprising in auteurs, genres, and fans. Enter the 70s and 80s, where we get some of the most well-known auteurs in Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, Stanley Kubrick, Martin Scorsese, and George Lucas, to just name a few. These directors led to a film renaissance in the 70s. These directors became stars themselves, with people specifically going to see films from these directors. Along with these star directors came their leading men that became huge stars due to their incredible acting capabilities. Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, and Jack Nicholson, to just name a few. Then, in 1975, one of the most influential films for Hollywood financially came out. Jaws, directed by Steven Spielberg, is the first ever blockbuster, a new term for a film that is a massive financial success. Jaws got people back into the theaters. During the 70s, like I said, many of the stars were there because of their incredible acting talent. However, starting in the late 70s, but mostly during the 80s, certain actors became massive stars because of their appearance and personality. Enter Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. These two brought back the power of the movie star, where you could slap Arnold onto any movie and people would flock to see it just because they loved his charisma and his biceps. The action star became the staple for movie stars. Bruce Willis, Tom Cruise, Harrison Ford, Kurt Russell, etc. But we don't live in the 80s anymore, and times have massively shifted. The shift started, like so many shifts in cinema, in the year 1999. There were series through the 80s like Terminator and Alien, but none of them were quite like what happened with the Star Wars prequels. They opened up the world and created a connected universe within cinema. Sure, it had big names in it like Liam Neeson, but nobody actually cared about that. Freaking Jedi were on the big screen again. You could cast anyone and people would flock by the millions to the theaters. Enter the age of franchises. While many movies were made in the early days of Hollywood based on books and series, nothing was quite like the shift in the 2000s. There was an uptick in the YA novel adaptation. Hunger Games, Eragon, Divergent, The Maze Runner, Twilight, Percy Jackson, Harry Potter. Most of these films had casts of relatively unknown, but most did very well at the box office, regardless of the varying quality of the films. But of course, we all know the biggest factor in this discussion: 2008. The advent of the MCU completely changed cinema. Robert Downey Jr. is one of the biggest stars of today, but in 2008 he was a recovering addict whose career was in shambles. Chris Evans wasn't necessarily a nobody, but he definitely wasn't a huge star, with disappointments like The Fantastic Four. The movies Chris Evans was in were Not Another Teen Movie, Push, and What's Your Number, not necessarily star status. Chris Hemsworth was in a role in the Star Trek movies, but was definitely not the star of the show. Now with the success of the MCU, these are the biggest stars in Hollywood, and yet, not really. Chaos Walking came out in 2021 and did not fare well in the box office, even though it had major stars from the two biggest franchises of all time. The Lighthouse had performances from the Green Goblin and Edward Cullen, but only grossed $7 million in the US. Granted, this film is very weird and not made for mass appeal, but the star status didn't help. Simu Liu was just part of a cute sitcom that is great, but not one of the most well-known ones. Yet, he was the star of a film that grossed over $450 million. Streaming services are so prevalent now that a Korean show with no notable actors for American audiences, yes, they are huge in Korea, but not known by Americans, can blow up as one of the largest shows on Netflix. Streaming services, even more than television, gives people reasons to stay home and not go to the theaters. The only reason people go to the theaters is to see major movies that they know are going to be enjoyable. Now more than ever, the characters and source materials are what draws people to the theaters, not Arnold Schwarzenegger.